Hello, everyone. My name is Lori Parfit, and I'm with LKP Impact Consulting. We are very excited to be with you today. We are going to be talking about navigating the green maze, financial compliance and data security with Ryan Quiddell from CJBS. Hi, Ryan. How are you today?
I'm doing great, Lori. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you for being on. I am very excited to be having this discussion with you. Ryan, can you give our listeners a little bit about your background?
Sure, Lori. My name is Ryan Goodell. I am one of the partners here at CJBS. I've been here now coming on 15 years. Wow, that's dating myself. With the firm and kind of worked myself up from staff member all the way to partner. One of the things that I specialize in with one of my other partners, Matt Bergman, is our cannabis practice. So we've taken a lot of clients and help them get started, get licensed, make sure they are in compliance within Illinois and then any other jurisdictions that they may be operating in. Yeah, we basically try to make sure that cannabis entities have the accounting and financial support that they need to make sure they're in compliance and they're not leaving anything on the table.
Love that, Ryan. I think it's really important for cannabis operators to really think this stuff through from the very beginning, because if they set themselves up properly from the get-go, it saves them from a lot of financial issues and other kinds of issues later on, especially on the compliance side, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. It's like anything in life, short-term pain, long-term gain. You have to deal with those issues on the onset, or they can rear their ugly head years down the road when it's very, very costly to the organization. It's always easier to do something on the onset and then adjust as you move forward instead of having to kind of start something 3 or 4 years down the road that you really should have started on day one. I think everybody knows which one's going to be more expensive to that cannabis entity. And we're trying to make sure everybody holds on to as much money as they possibly can with our good friend 280E out there.
I know. I think that's really important to discuss. So thank you for being here. As I said, my name is Lori Parfit. I am your host today. Excited to be here with you. I'm with LKP Impact Consulting. We're a fractional CMO firm. We are going to be covering a few very important topics with Ryan today. And so I am excited to get started with our first topic. So we are talking about data security, which is something that a lot of operators don't think about from the beginning, because you're thinking about getting your license, getting your facility up and running. And so data security is something that kind of becomes either an afterthought, or maybe you don't even think about it until you have a problem. And so data security is incredibly important in the cannabis space. So Ryan, maybe you could give us a little bit of information on what makes the cannabis industry more vulnerable to data breaches and data security issues.
Sure, Lori. I think the first thing is that it comes from the business owners. So if we were talking about a manufacturing or a distribution entity getting started up, usually the ownership group or the investors probably have background in running one of those types of businesses in the past. That's not usually the case with cannabis entities. It's usually people that, may have worked in the industry, may have been doing something completely different and kind of want to start this up. So what ends up happening is they're not as mature business people. They don't have the exact same experience that maybe some other industries have. And that's not a bad thing. It just means that they need additional support. But what ends up happening from that standpoint is there some holes that might be there. If I'm an investor and I'm starting up a manufacturing company or a distribution company, and I've done this a couple of times, I know how important IT is and my data security and things like that. When you're starting up a cannabis business and you may have not run a business before, your bread and butter and what you're concerned about is bringing in some dollars. And that's what you're focused on. You're not thinking about that external item of data security until it's, the pot is essentially boiling over. So I'd say that would be the first thing. The second thing is, if we're talking about Fortune 500 companies, they have large software programs, the Oracles, the SAPs of the world. We really don't have that in the cannabis space right now. We don't have the predominant ERP system. A lot of our clients are using QuickBooks Online with then add-ins and third-party programs, either for inventory management, customer management, things like that. Maybe some of their marketing programs and pulling that data. What ends up happening, and again, for the people who maybe not be as versed in this, a lot of times when you have QuickBooks Online and then that third-party software, there's an API link. Well, if I'm somebody and I'm a hacker and I'm trying to get after you, I know that QuickBooks Online probably isn't going to bear a whole lot of fruit. That's going to be difficult. There's dual factor authentication, things like that. A lot of times those individuals will know that the third-party software may not have the same security features. And what they'll do is they might be able to get a login or hack into that third-party software, change the API key. And then the next day, your employee logs in and is like, okay, the data feeds aren't working. Oh, I need to update the API key without even thinking why the API key would have changed. They drop in a new one, and now that person has access to all that third-party information. If that is your inventory data, that's going to be really, really, hurtful to the organization. So again, there's a couple pieces there. It's one that I think that the business owners may not be as mature as other business owners in different industries. And then we don't really have a nice, solid ERP system that is buttoned down. We're using a lot of kind of, fragmented pieces to get to where we need to go, unfortunately.
Right. So you don't have the mature IT resources that you would see in a normal company. So when you go work for a company in another industry, they have a robust IT team. There's somebody setting up your computers, making sure that everything is functioning the right way. With cannabis operations, even if you do have some experience from another business, it's still, you're trying to learn how to set up a cannabis business, which is different than anything else. And so
Yep.
this is something that kind of falls by the wayside. And then the second part of that you really discussed, which I think is really important for everybody to understand, is that in the cannabis space, we don't have access to a lot of those big platforms, the big ERP systems that
Yep.
other industries have. So we're piecemealing everything. So you have a POS provider, you might have a different e-commerce provider, you have different inventory providers, you have seed to sale, things like that. And you're
Yep.
trying to piece it all together. And every time you have an integration, what I heard you say is every integration, every API is a weak spot.
Correct.
And so you have to be very cognizant of those weak spots to ensure hackers don't get into them.
Correct. And then the other side of that is, the training for your staff. Okay, because that's how these type of hacks are predominantly utilized. Is it's somebody at the staff level that gets phished or something like that. So you need to make sure that there's training. And one of the things that at least I have seen is there's not a whole lot of solid training on the front end for new employees and what they need to do. But like, again, when we hire somebody here at CJBS, my IT manager puts them through training, right? And we have certain training classes that they have to go through, and that ties into our cyber insurance premiums. Unless, a cannabis entity is, utilizing an entity like Comply to have them come in and provide that training on the onset, are your employees logging into your QuickBooks Online at their Starbucks while they're getting coffee? That's a public Wi-Fi. And that's not what you want to do. Do they know that? I know that I don't check my work email when I'm at Starbucks. And if I do need to check my work email when I'm at Starbucks, I make sure that I turn the Wi-Fi off and I'm only going through my 5G network essentially, and that I've got that buttoned down. So again, some issues there that I think cannabis business owners don't really think about on the onset, and why it's so important to have, a CJBS or a Comply that you've kind of, you're starting to work with to make sure that you're not leaving those issues unattended, because Lori, you and I have talked about this before. A lot of times things don't get addressed until they're boiling over, and that's too late.
Right. No, you don't want to be putting the fire out. You want to be getting ahead of it and preventing. Preventative care is the best kind of care. And so I want to clarify one of the things you were talking about. So you talked about comply coming in. So that's, IT setup from the onset, making sure you have those floor plans set up, your infrastructure, your IT solutions, your data security, making sure you have all of that before you even open your doors is really what you're
Mhm.
talking about there.
Yeah, ultimately, because it's much harder, once you kind of get the ship moving in a direction, it's really hard to steer it a different way. It's much easier just kind of get that set up on the onset. It's like anything, if you get your accounting and your chart of accounts and everything set up and your integrations on the onset, it usually will run smoother than if you go, oh, uh-oh, we didn't do this and you're 3, 6 months in and you have to go back and redo all of that work, or the integration wasn't working or talking well. The APIs weren't speaking back and forth. So there's some things there that, we've got to address from the cannabis side that I think, like I said, I think business owners just, it's not at the forefront of their mind, right? They're worried about making as much money as we can because of 280E and some of the other compliance measures. And this is just, I don't want to say an afterthought, but sometimes it's an afterthought, and can be an expensive afterthought.
Couldn't agree with you more. And so, when something like this happens in all other industries. There's always data breaches. We hear about it all the time. But what's the
Yep.
big risk here on the cannabis side?
Well, this is essentially medical data from that side. I mean, and what you're doing, and you have HIPAA compliance as well if you are a medical versus recreational, and so there's other issues that pop up with that. But from a just overall data security standpoint, if we have in the past we've had the Home Depot and the Target data breaches, oh, and you hear on the news, oh, we are so sorry. We're going to offer you a year of free credit monitoring. So sad. We won't let it happen again, tisk, 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 Home Depot and Target. Okay. If that happens in our industry, what they're going to basically say is, look this is federally illegal. They don't know what they're doing. They're bozos. And all of those stereotypes play into the industry and everything that people think, and they point the finger and say, look they can't do this. Look at what happened. That's, it can happen to any organization, and people need to know that, but the connotation and the context, if it happens in the cannabis world, is that people are stupid and don't know what they're doing. And it depresses our entire industry when we're trying to take steps to move this forward and make it better for everybody.
Right. So we have reputational risk. So
Correct.
nobody's saying when there's a data breach at Target or Home Depot, oh, I'm never going to shop at Target and Home Depot again. Those people don't know what they're doing. But in the
Yep.
cannabis space, it's all about, oh, they're not federally legal. This is why we shouldn't be doing business with them. They don't know what they're doing. They don't do business the right way. And
Yep.
so it just sets our entire industry back and
Correct.
causes our patients and our customers not to trust us.
Yeah. The other thing with that is you got to think about it from a geographic location, right? That's Target and Home Depot, that's nationwide, right?
Mhm.
What happens in our world, these data breaches are going to happen at the dispensary level, right? Because that's where all the data is held. When that happens, it's everybody, in 6, 10, 15 mile geographic radius that basically are going to be affected by that. Do you think they're ever going to show that gets broadcast on the news? You think they're ever going to that dispensary again? Not a chance.
Probably
Not a
not.
chance. They will, I mean, they're going to drive past it and, be given it the scarlet letter as they drive past, or, the one finger salute, and that's the thing, it will collapse the business. Home Depot and Target, it's a road bump. For a cannabis entity, that is like quicksand falling off a cliff. And you can't, once that cat's out of the bag, it's gone. And here's the other side. What if there's elected officials in that town that go to the dispensary, don't really want people to know, don't want it broadcast, but then their data's leaked? And, you don't think the news is going to go, oh, the mayor of town XYZ, all this data breach, and look at his purchase history. Like, is that really going to move our industry forward? No, that is going to be terrible, terrible news. And everyone's going to be pointing the finger saying, see, told you so. And that's not really the case. It was just, even if one person just doesn't button down their system, we could all feel the ramifications of that.
I think that's an excellent point. And so I think what cannabis operators really need to take from this is you spend a lot of time getting your license, you spend a ton of money getting your business up and running. If you don't think about this from the onset, this could be the one little thing that takes you out. And so when we think about
101%.
our next topic, which is ensuring financial compliance. So compliance is a big issue in the cannabis space, whether it's compliance with state and local regs, whether it's compliance from a tax perspective, but there's also compliance from a data perspective as well. So how does data security contribute to maintaining financial compliance in the cannabis space from your perspective?
Well, I guess the first thing is you need that data security so you can have the financial compliance. Because what happens, so let's say, for instance, your system goes down. Let's say that you're not in QuickBooks Online and using something in the cloud and your system goes down. And let's say that your system goes down on the 3rd or the 4th and your inventory reporting to the state is due on the 15th. What are you going to do? What happens? And then, okay, when we do get everything back up and running, how do I confirm that that information is indeed correct and basically ties to what was there previously? Does anybody make sure that, the backup is correct and complete? Good question. But that is ultimately one of the things that we see. And, when you're not focusing on this and you have a data breach or you lose some data, you're kind of going to be, unfortunately, SOL, and then you're going to have compliance issues, unfortunately, and what you need to do. And I'm not sure, at least in my dealings with local jurisdictions, they're not very understanding when you say, oh, lost all my data, going to need an extension on getting you that inventory report. You think that that's going to make them, I always joke around that I work in warm and fuzzies. Is that going to make the state compliance officer essentially warm and fuzzy? No, they're going to start going, uh-oh, I'm probably going to want to go in there because there's probably going to be some low-hanging fruit because they don't know what they're doing, or, if they can't keep their data secure, what else are they not keeping secure? And it basically kind of pokes holes into the entire control structure of the organization, not just from data security, but the entire control structure.
Right. So you could actually be setting yourself up for a complete audit. You could end up with all of those major issues that you didn't anticipate, and they're going to dig into other things that you might not want them digging into because this has been the red flag for them. And, I think it's really important for everybody to understand that this is an industry about compliance. And everything we do in this industry is going to affect it 10, 50, 100 years down the road. We can't screw it up. We've got to start getting these things right now. We've got to professionalize our industry. We've got to do things the right way. And like what you're talking about, which is going to a regulator and basically saying the dog ate my homework. We don't let our children get away with that. There's no way any regulator is going to let a business get away with that either.
Absolutely. And again, you want to I always joke around, and I guess not joke around, but I always say that we have to act in this industry like we are publicly traded companies. Publicly traded companies, again, do they have data breaches and data loss? Yes, but they have plans in place to put it back. A lot of times, and if you're not working with a comply and you don't have a data security plan, what happens if you have a complete and total data loss? What is it? What's the plan to put it back together? I had a client years ago that had essentially a data breach where the backups, they had a system issue and then found out the backups were not working because nobody was confirming that the backups were working. So they had to go back and then try to recreate a 1.5 years worth of data. And they were a construction contractor. Percentage of completion. It was an absolute nightmare, but it took them basically from that day between 4 and 5 months to get everything squared away. Okay. They're a construction contractor. They were making, umpteen millions of dollars a year. They could absorb it and kind of keep moving without the business being crippled. What happens if that's your local dispensary and they don't have data for 4 or 5 months? And again, they probably don't have the same volume of data potentially as that construction company, but maybe they do, depending on their size. What happens? Again, the entire house of cards has kind of fallen on itself.
But not only do they, maybe they don't have that amount of data, but they also don't have the amount of people
Correct.
to grow at the problem. And so then you end up having to bring in outside resources potentially, and that gets more and more expensive. And if it took a construction company in a mature industry 4 to 6 months to piece it together in the cannabis space, that could be 1 to 2 years.
Yep. Oh yeah. Well, and the thing that I kind of see with cannabis clients is that not that compliance is an afterthought, but they're always so focused on making money. It's like, we'll deal with the compliance as we go. And that's the wrong thought process. What we really want to do is make sure that the compliance is buttoned down, because once we have the compliance buttoned down, now we can basically make sure that we're squeezing all of the juice out of the orange, right? But if we're
Mhm.
just focused on making money and then there's a compliance issue that we have to deal with, right? We've lost time value of money, we've lost opportunity costs. If that was an initial item, we would have spent less on it than dealing with it a year or two plus, like I said, the opportunity cost there. That could really hurt your company down the road. And it's one of those things, it's short-term pain, it's long-term gain. That's why you got to have, a strong accounting team, a strong finance team, a strong IT team. And if that's not somebody internally, because you only have, a limited amount of employees, you got to bring somebody like to comply and to button your system down.
Right. And so the message to operators out there is get this stuff squared away so you can actually focus on your business,
Correct.
because this is really what's going to interrupt your business. So do this on the outset, get it out of the way, get
Mhm.
it set up properly, and then it should be much easier to run your business down the road. So
Correct.
moving into our next topic. So this is risks in, cannabis companies, security and data. So what do you see as some of the most common external threats to data security in cannabis?
Uh, Again, I think hackers see this as low-hanging fruit, and if they're going to go get some juice, this is an easy place to get that squeeze. And the reason being because everything in our industry is essentially fragmented. There's a bunch of different POS systems that integrate into QuickBooks Online, and you have a different third-party, essentially inventory backends, and you may have an e-commerce backend as well. With all of that working together, there's just essentially more risk, right? Hackers probably aren't going to go after Oracle and trying to break into that because they know Oracle has, probably 150 people just working on making sure that, their ERPs are buttoned down and there's no way that you can get into them. That's not the world that we're in or we're playing in yet, because we're not federally legal. Oracle will not touch a cannabis entity. I have tried, I have a contact over there. I have tried multiple times to kind of do that, and they are not playing ball yet. So that essentially leaves us at risk to hackers. And there's a lot of, they can see this as low hanging fruit. The other side that kind of plays into this is the increase in the value of cryptocurrency, right? So in the past, you had ransomware attacks. Well, ransomware attacks kind of slowed down after, you saw 2020, 2021, as crypto was kind of going up, you saw those attacks go up as well. Now
Yeah.
you've seen them kind of come down. The price of crypto is back going up. And if you look and you do a quick Google search, you'll see that those ransomware attacks are starting to pick up as well. Now, that is honestly my bigger concern with a lot of cannabis entities, is that they're going to get hit with something like that. And they will essentially be forced to pay the fee and pay the ransom to get their data back if they don't have somebody like a comply and they're not utilizing them for backups and the data security. I mean, if that happens, I would prefer, if that did happen to a client, that they only lose a day of data. Okay, we got to recreate a day of data, from the point that the ransomware attack occurred. We restore our stuff and we're back to running, and that guy can go away. Obviously, we probably have to send out some notices to people and things like that, but we can deal with that. Yeah.
So you have your weak spots for the integration, which hackers can get into. You have ransomware attacks. What about just employee mistakes?
Oh yeah, and that's another side of it as well. Like we kind of talked about before, employee mistakes, logging into something from a public Wi-Fi and somebody was spoofing the Wi-Fi and now they have your login information and poof, you logged in, you were about to get on a plane, right? Somebody logged into the QuickBooks Online account while you were, in the air or whatever, and was able to hack it and, reroute the dual factor authentication at that point as well. And poof, and you don't know until you've landed that something, you're getting notifications about a new login and you're like, uh, I was on a plane. How did I log in? At that point, it's all over.
Right. I mean, you've spent 2 hours or more in the air and it's already happened. Or there's also the issue of getting an email that looks like it's from your boss asking you to send a wire transfer and to
Mhm.
find out that they've spoofed the email. All of these
Yep.
things happen in other industries, but they become a much bigger deal on the cannabis side. So we're
Yes.
getting to the end of our discussion. And so our last topic is really how do we ensure that cannabis operations are set up for success? So, Ryan, could you just give us some quick hits? What are some key things that you want to make sure that cannabis operators know that they should be doing from the very beginning?
Well, I guess to preface that, Lori, what I would say is I don't want cannabis operators to think of IT as a line item cost on their P&L. What I want them, what I want them to see that as is essentially insurance. Okay. We tell them, and again, you wouldn't cut corners on your insurance. I wouldn't cut corners on my insurance. But if I have them think of IT in the insurance realm, at least when we've been building models, I've been getting better traction with clients saying, oh, that's not really something I can cut. Okay. I don't want them to think down the road that this is a cost that can be chopped. I want them to think of it at the front end that this is a cost just like my insurance. And I need to spend this every year to make sure that my compliance, my data security is buttoned down so that we're set moving forward. Other best practices, encryption. Okay, if you're going to have, even if you're in the cloud and you're using QuickBooks Online, I still recommend that you have backups, potentially tape backups. I know that's a little bit more old school, but again, that's something that you got to work with comply on. The other thing is, my background is on IT. I've got some servers at my home. One thing that I always recommend is kind of putting a canary in the coal mine. And what is that? So if anybody knows what a canary in a coal mine is, essentially kind of what it sounds like. What you do is you basically kind of put a data set on a server that would kind of grab the hacker's attention. And then once they kind of access that folder, they're essentially locked out of everything else. And then essentially it's a canary in a coal mine. And so as soon as they access that, they lock out everything else. You have all of their information at that point, essentially IP logs, access, things like that. You can see kind of how it happened and then figure out and or essentially reverse engineer what occurred to try to make sure it doesn't happen again. Now for cannabis clients that might be a little bit overzealous, at least initially for them, but some of our bigger, MSOs, that might be something that their IT teams are starting to utilize. So a couple quick things right there that will definitely end up helping organizations. I guess from the other side, making correct choices on your software providers and things like that, and utilizing professionals that can recommend good software packages as opposed to, you know, if there's a brand new POS system in the cannabis space and I haven't heard of it and you tell me about it, I'm probably not going to tell you to go with it. It's, there's a lot of mature players that we have that I would push you towards. So again, making good decisions and kind of thinking, having a strong thought process and utilizing the professionals in your network.
So it's really getting things set up the right way. It's getting that insurance out there. And I'm glad you brought up insurance because I think that's another area where people don't want to invest in it until they need it. By the time they need it, it's too late. And so
Yep.
getting ahead of it is really important. Make sure you have your encryption up properly. And I love that canary in a coal mine. I think that is something that any company should be employing to make sure that they protect their data. So,
Yep.
Ryan, thank you so much for your time today. I think you've given our audience an amazing amount of information on how they can protect themselves. if anybody wants to reach out to you, how would they do so?
So you can either call me 847-580-5432 or shoot me an email. My direct email is rjg@cjbs.com. And if you have a question, concern, please shoot me an email. I'm always here to help. My driving force is to help companies and people in this industry. So please reach out.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And thanks to all of you for joining us today. As I mentioned, I'm Lori Parfit with LKP Impact Consulting, and this was Ryan Guadell from CJBS. Thank you so much. Have a great day.